Hey guys, March 415 AD. Alexandria. A woman's chariot stops in the street. Christian mob surrounds her. They drag Hypatia, brilliant mathematician, philosopher teacher, into a church. Strip her naked, murder her with broken pottery shards, tear her body apart, burn the pieces. Why? Because she dared to think, to teach, to challenge their world. Tonight we're going back to where it all started, back to when this extraordinary mind first opened her eyes to the stars above ancient Alexandria. This is her story. Alright, get comfortable. Grab your favourite pillow. Turn off those screens. We're about to travel back 16 centuries to walk the marble halls of the greatest library ever built. If you're new here, welcome to Sleep Story Scribes. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives into history's most fascinating minds. And drop a comment. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? I love hearing from you night owls around the world. Now, let's step into ancient Alexandria. Chapter 1. Bright Star of Alexandria. Hypatia's birth. Picture this. The year is 360 AD. You're standing at Alexandria's harbour, watching ships from across the known world unload their cargo. Papyrus from Egypt, spices from India, silk from China. But here's what makes this city different from every other trading port. Those ships aren't just carrying goods. They're carrying ideas, scholars, philosophers, mathematicians, all drawn to one place, the great library, the beating heart of human knowledge. Walk with me through Alexandria's streets, past the lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the world, through markets where vendors speak a dozen languages, up marble steps to the museum district. And there it is, the great library. But forget what you think you know about libraries. This isn't just scrolls gathering dust. This is, imagine the world's first university, first research institute, first international campus, all rolled into one magnificent complex that stretches as far as you can see. Inside these walls lives the Theon, mathematician, astronomer, last great commentator on Euclid's geometry. He spent his life here, calculating the movements of planets, teaching students who travel from across the empire. His hands are permanently stained with ink. His mind constantly turning over problems that would make modern calculators weep. But tonight, as winter winds blow off the Mediterranean, Theon isn't thinking about mathematics. His wife is in labour. Their child is about to change everything. The baby arrives just after midnight. A daughter. They name her Hypatia after the ancient goddess of the highest wisdom. And here's what Theon notices. Almost immediately. This child doesn't cry like other babies. She watches. Those dark eyes track movement across the room, follow shadows dancing on the wall. When she's older, barely walking, she reaches for his geometrical instruments, not to play with them, to study them, to understand how they work. Theon sees something in those eyes, something brilliant. Alexandria in 360 AD is unlike anywhere else on Earth. Walk through the museum quarter and you'll hear heated debates in Greek, Latin, Coptic, Hebrew, scholars arguing about whether the Earth moves around the sun, doctors dissecting bodies to understand circulation, engineers designing water clocks that keep perfect time. This is where human knowledge lives and breathes, where questions aren't dangerous, they're sacred. Where a curious mind can feast on ideas that won't be accepted in Europe for another 1,000 years. The library itself, God, it's breathtaking. Imagine halls lined floor to ceiling with papyrus scrolls, 500,000 texts from across the ancient world. But that's just the beginning. Lecture theatres where professors teach geometry to packed audiences. Study rooms where scholars debate late into the night. Dormitories for visiting academics. Gardens where philosophers walk and think, even a dining hall where ideas cross-pollinate over wine and bread. This isn't just a library, it's a living, breathing organism of human curiosity. Here's where Thon makes a decision that will echo through history. His daughter is 4 years old. In any other household, she'd be learning to weave, to cook, to be silent. But Thon sees how she arranges her toys in perfect geometric patterns, how she counts everything, stones, stars, steps, how she asks questions that would challenge his graduate students. So he makes a choice. He's going to give Hypatia the education of a son, the full curriculum, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, everything. By age 7, Hypatia is working through Euclid's Elements, not memorizing, understanding. She sees patterns in numbers that seasoned mathematicians miss. Theon watches her tiny fingers trace geometric proofs on wax tablets, her mind already racing ahead to implications he hasn't considered. She doesn't just learn mathematics, she inhabits it, lives inside its logical beauty. When other children play with dolls, she builds models of Platonic solids. When they tell stories, she calculates the mathematics of music and harmony. Then comes astronomy. The Theon takes her to the library's observation deck on clear nights, points up at the celestial sphere wheeling overhead, shows her how to use the astrolabe, how to predict eclipses, how to map the wandering paths of planets. But Hypatia doesn't just observe the stars. She questions them. Why do they move like that? What forces govern their dance? These aren't questions a child should be asking. But Hypatia has never been an ordinary child. At 12, she encounters Plato's Republic, then Plotinus, the philosophy that will shape her entire worldview, Neoplatonism, the idea that mathematics isn't just useful, it's sacred. That geometric forms exist in a perfect realm beyond the material world, that studying mathematics is a way of touching the divine. For Hypatia, this isn't abstract philosophy, this is revelation. She's found her calling, mathematics as a spiritual practice, knowledge as a form of worship. Picture the whispers following them through Alexandria's streets. Theon walking with his teenage daughter, both carrying scrolls, heading to lectures at the museum. People stare. A girl studying geometry? Philosophy? It's unheard of, unseemly. But Theon doesn't care about convention. He sees what his daughter has become, a mind that can hold its own with any scholar in the empire. He's not just educating Hypatia, he's preparing her for something unprecedented, something that will shake Alexandria to its foundations. As Hypatia approaches womanhood, she's mastered subjects that most men never attempt. She can calculate planetary positions, prove geometric theorems, debate Aristotelian logic. She wears her learning like armor, protection against a world that expects women to be silent and domestic. But here in Alexandria, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of centuries, she's preparing for something extraordinary, to become the greatest female mathematician of the ancient world, and to pay the ultimate price for daring to shine so bright. Chapter 2. A scholar in scholar's clothing. Hypatia's early rising. Picture this, Alexandria, around 390 AD. A woman walks through the streets wearing a man's himation, the flowing robe that marks you as a serious philosopher. People stop and stare. Some whisper. Others shake their heads. This isn't just fashion rebellion. This is Hypatia announcing something revolutionary, that her mind belongs in the same spaces as men's. That knowledge doesn't have a gender. Pretty radical for the 4th century. That himation wasn't just cloth, it was armor. See, in Alexandria, what you wore told everyone exactly where you belonged in the social order. Slaves wore tunics, citizens wore togas, philosophers wore hypatia. Women wore stolas and stayed home. But here's Hypatia, striding through the agora in philosophers' robes like she owned the place. Because in her mind, she did. The clothing said, "I'm not your typical woman. I'm not anyone's typical anything," and that made some people very, very uncomfortable. But the real scandal wasn't what she wore. It was what she did while wearing it. Hypatia taught mixed classes, men and women, learning together, in the same room, at the same time. Think about how wild that was. Most Roman women couldn't even leave their houses without permission. And here's Hypatia running public lectures, where young men and women sat side by side, discussing Plato's geometry and Aristotle's logic. The conservatives were absolutely losing their minds, but students kept coming from everywhere. Her lecture hall, man, it must have been electric. Picture a semicircle of marble benches, sunlight streaming through the columns, and there's Hypatia pacing back and forth, chalk in hand, working through some impossible mathematical proof on a wax tablet. Her voice carries across the space, clear, confident, passionate. She doesn't just teach the material, she makes you fall in love with it, makes you see the hidden patterns in numbers, the elegant logic behind planetary motion. Students are scribbling notes frantically, trying to keep up, and these weren't just local kids. Students travelled from across the Roman Empire to study with her, from Athens, from Constantinople, from Rome itself. Young men who'd heard whispers about the woman philosopher in Alexandria who could explain the mysteries of the universe. They'd pack their scrolls, say goodbye to their families, and make the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean just for a chance to sit in her classroom. That's how famous she was getting. That's how good she was at what she did. Take Orestes, for instance, future Roman prefect of Alexandria. But first, Hypatia's student. Bright kid from a wealthy family, probably used to getting his way. But in Hypatia's classroom, privilege didn't matter, only your mind did. She pushed him harder than anyone ever had, made him question everything he thought he knew. Years later, when he's running the city, he'll still consider her his greatest teacher, his closest advisor, his friend. That's the kind of impact she had on people. Now here's what's really impressive. Hypatia wasn't just teaching theory. She was advancing practical science. While other philosophers sat around debating how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, Hypatia was building things, inventing things, solving real problems. She designed improved astrolabes for navigation, refined mechanical devices for measuring time and distance. But her masterpiece? Something that doesn't sound glamorous, but was absolutely revolutionary. She invented an early version of the hydrometer, and that changed everything. A hydrometer measures liquid density. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. This little device could tell you the purity of gold, the strength of wine, the salinity of seawater. Merchants could test if their oil was watered down. Metallurgists could check their alloys. Ship captains could predict how their cargo would affect their vessel's balance. Hypatia took pure mathematical theory and turned it into something useful, something that made life better for regular people. That's genius-level thinking, connecting the abstract to the practical, making knowledge work. Her daily routine was unlike any other woman's in Alexandria. Up before dawn, reading by oil lamp, mathematical calculations with breakfast. Then off to the lecture halls, that philosopher's robe flowing behind her. Afternoons spent with individual students, working through complex proofs. Evenings devoted to her own research, star charts, mechanical drawings, correspondence with scholars across the empire. She lived like a monk, basically. Celibate, devoted entirely to learning. But unlike monks, she wasn't hiding from the world. She was trying to understand it completely. This lifestyle sparked intense reactions. Some people were fascinated by her. Wealthy Romans would invite her to dinner parties just to hear her talk. They'd ask her opinion on everything from architecture to poetry. She became something of a celebrity, the brilliant woman who could out-debate any man in the city. But for every person who admired her, there was another who despised what she represented. A woman stepping out of her prescribed role, challenging the natural order, being too smart, too independent, too visible. The city was changing around her, and not in ways that favoured someone like Hypatia. Alexandria was becoming more religious, more conservative, more suspicious of pagan learning. The old tolerant atmosphere, where Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Jews, and Christians had mingled freely in the pursuit of knowledge, that was disappearing, replaced by something harder, more rigid. Christian bishops were gaining political power, and they had very definite ideas about women's proper place in society. Ideas that didn't include teaching philosophy to men. You could feel the tension building. In the markets, in the forums, in the lecture halls. Old school pagans versus the new Christian establishment. Secular learning versus religious doctrine. Traditional Roman tolerance versus increasingly militant faith. And right in the middle of it all, Hypatia, the woman in philosopher's robes, teaching forbidden subjects to mixed audiences, representing everything the hardliners wanted to eliminate. She was becoming a symbol of the old ways, of dangerous ideas, of women who didn't know their place. By the early 400s, the writing was on the wall. Bishop Theophilus had been replaced by his nephew Cyril, a much more aggressive leader, someone who saw pagan philosophy not as harmless intellectual exercise, but as active threat to Christian truth. The great library, once the crown jewel of human knowledge, was being stripped of its resources. Scholars were starting to look over their shoulders. And Hypatia, she kept teaching, kept researching, kept wearing those philosopher's robes. Even as the storm clouds gathered, what she couldn't see yet, what none of them could see, was how personal this was about to become. How her friendship with Orestes would drag her into the middle of a vicious political war. How her very existence as a successful, independent pagan woman would make her the perfect target for everything the extremists hated about the old world. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Hypatia, brilliant as she was, had no idea what was coming for her. Chapter 3. A budding friendship and a city on edge. Something shifting in Hypatia's world. Up until now, her life revolved around numbers, stars, philosophy, the classroom, her students, but Alexandria is changing around her, and she's about to get pulled into something much bigger than mathematics. Politics, power, the kind of friendships that matter when a city starts tearing itself apart. And trust me, this city's about to tear itself apart. Enter Orestes, Roman prefect of Alexandria. Think governor, but with more authority and way more headaches. He's supposed to keep the peace in this powder keg of a city. Jews, Christians, pagans, philosophers, merchants, everyone's got an agenda. Everyone's got enemies, and somehow this powerful Roman official becomes fascinated by a pagan woman who teaches math. Yeah, you can see where this is going. It's complicated. How do they even meet? Picture this. Orestes needs to understand some engineering project. Water systems, maybe construction mathematics. Someone tells him there's this brilliant mathematician in the city. Hypatia. He shows up expecting some old bearded scholar. Instead, he finds this articulate woman explaining complex geometry like it's simple conversation. He's hooked, not romantically, intellectually, which might be more dangerous in the long run. Their friendship develops slowly. Orestes starts attending her lectures. Not officially, he can't be seen favouring pagan philosophy too openly, but privately. He becomes her student. And more than that, he becomes her window into Alexandria's political chaos. All those tensions she's been ignoring while focused on stars and equations? Suddenly they're sitting in her study, discussing them over wine, reality's knocking on her door. Through Orestes, Hypatia sees how the game really works. It's not about truth or knowledge anymore. It's about power. Who controls what? Who gets to decide what people believe? The old Alexandria, the one where ideas mattered more than politics. That's dying, and she's starting to realize she might not be able to stay above the fray much longer. The scholarly ivory tower is cracking, Meanwhile, Christianity is exploding across the empire. Not just growing, exploding. Constantine legalized it decades ago. But now it's becoming the only acceptable religion. Temples are being converted into churches. Pagan festivals are banned. And in Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the ancient world, this religious revolution is getting ugly fast. Old gods versus new. Ancient wisdom versus Christian doctrine. The atmosphere in the city is getting thick. You can feel it in the markets, the streets, the lecture halls. Christians walking with more confidence, pagans looking over their shoulders, Jews caught in the middle, and the intellectuals, people like Hypatia, they're starting to realize their entire worldview is under attack. This isn't just religious conversion, this is cultural extinction, the old world burning down around them. Enter the religious heavyweights. First there's Theophilus, patriarch of Alexandria. This guy doesn't just lead Christians, he commands them like an army. He's the one who destroyed the great temple of Serapis, turned it into rubble, converted the Serapeum library into a church. When Theophilus decides something needs to go, it goes. And he's been eyeing the remaining pagan institutions for years. But the Theophilus dies, and that's when things get really interesting. His nephew Cyril takes over. And if you thought Theophilus was extreme, you haven't seen anything yet. Cyril makes his uncle look moderate. This man doesn't just oppose paganism, he sees it as a personal insult to God. Every pagan scholar, every ancient ritual, every philosophical debate, it's all heresy that needs to be crushed. Immediately, Cyril's got this terrifying combination of genuine religious conviction and political brilliance. He truly believes he's doing God's work, but he also knows exactly how to use mobs, leverage popular opinion, manipulate fear. He can quote scripture and organize street violence with equal skill. And he's looking at Hypatia's school, this beacon of pagan learning, with very unfriendly eyes. She's on his radar now. Here's what makes Cyril dangerous. He doesn't just preach. He acts. Fast, decisively, ruthlessly. Jewish communities getting too prominent. He expels them from the city. Pagan temples still operating. His followers tear them down overnight. Philosophers teaching ideas he doesn't like. Their schools get shut down. Their students get harassed. Sometimes worse. Alexandria's becoming his Christian kingdom, one destroyed institution at a time. And this creates a massive problem for Orestes. He's Roman authority, secular power. He's supposed to maintain order, protect all citizens, including pagans, including Jews, including philosophers. But Cyril's got popular support, religious fervour, mobs who'll do whatever he asks. So you've got two power structures in the same city, increasingly at odds. Church versus state. Religious law versus Roman law. It's unsustainable. The tension keeps building. Cyril pushes boundaries. Orestes pushes back. Christian mobs get bolder. Pagan intellectuals get more nervous. And Hypatia? She's right in the middle of it all. Friend to the prefect, symbol of pagan learning, target of Christian hostility. She represents everything Cyril wants to destroy and everything Orestes is trying to protect. This friendship is about to become a political crisis. By the end of this chapter, the battle lines are drawn. Cyril commanding Christian Alexandria, like a general. Orestes trying to maintain Roman order in an increasingly unruly city. And Hypatia, brilliant, naive Hypatia, still thinking she can stay above politics and just teach mathematics. She has no idea what's coming for her, but everyone else does. The storm clouds are gathering, and she's standing right in their path. Chapter 4. In the Eye of the Storm. Hypatia's unwanted spotlight. Picture this. Every morning, Hypatia walks through Alexandria's marble streets to her school. Students wait eagerly. Scrolls spread across tables. Mathematical proofs sketched in sand. To her, This is just Tuesday, another day of teaching, of pushing minds toward truth. But outside her philosophical bubble, the city's changing, fast, and she has no idea that every lesson she teaches, every public appearance she makes, is being watched, catalogued, used against her. See, Hypatia thinks she's just a teacher, a scholar doing what scholars do, but that's not how everyone else sees her anymore. To Alexandria's Christians, she's become something much more dangerous, a symbol, the living embodiment of everything they're trying to replace: pagan learning, ancient wisdom, the old ways that refuse to die. Every time she stands before a crowd, explaining the movements of planets or the mysteries of numbers, she's not just teaching mathematics, she's defending a dying world. And here's the thing about symbols: they don't get to choose what they represent. Hypatia never asked to be the poster child for secular learning. She just wanted to study the stars, teach geometry, explore the nature of reality. But intent doesn't matter when you're caught in the middle of a cultural revolution. Christianity isn't just growing in Alexandria anymore. It's conquering, converting temples into churches, replacing festivals with feast days, and Hypatia, she's become the face of resistance, whether she likes it or not. The irony is brutal. Some of her best students are Christians. They sit in her classroom, furiously taking notes as she explains Ptolemaic astronomy or Euclidean proofs. They respect her mind, seek her wisdom, but outside those walls, their fellow believers whisper that she's corrupting the faithful, leading souls astray. How can you study pagan philosophy without being polluted by it? How can truth come from someone who refuses to accept Christ? The contradictions are tearing the city apart. Then there's Orestes, poor loyal Orestes, her former student, now Roman prefect, trying desperately to keep Alexandria from exploding. He values her counsel, needs her wisdom to govern this impossible city. But every time they're seen together, every private meeting, every public conversation, it adds fuel to the fire. Look, the Christians whisper, look how the pagan witch has enchanted our Roman governor. See how she poisons even the corridors of power with her ancient magic and godless philosophy. Cyril sees this. Oh, Cyril sees everything. The new patriarch isn't like his uncle Theophilus. He's smarter, more calculating. Where Theophilus used brute force, Cyril uses psychology. He doesn't need to attack Hypatia directly. He just needs to let the city's fears do the work for him. A word here, a suggestion there. Let the faithful draw their own conclusions about this woman who dares to teach men, who walks unveiled through the streets, who speaks of truth without mentioning Christ. The transformation is subtle at first, conversations that stop when she enters a room. Students who used to greet her warmly now nod politely and look away. Market vendors who charge her just a little more than they used to. Small things, but Hypatia's not naive. She can feel the shift, like pressure dropping before a storm. The easy camaraderie she once enjoyed with Alexandria's citizens is curdling into something colder, more suspicious, more dangerous. Yet still, she continues teaching, still believes in the power of reason, because what else can she do? This is who she is. Mathematics doesn't stop being true because people are afraid of it. The stars don't change their courses because human politics shift. Hypatia has spent her entire life in pursuit of knowledge, and she's not about to abandon that now. But every day brings new rumours, new accusations. They say she practices magic. They say she seduces men away from Christ with her pagan wiles. They say she's the reason God has brought drought to Egypt. The city that once celebrated its intellectual diversity is becoming a battleground. Philosophers versus theologians, secular authority versus religious power, ancient wisdom versus Christian doctrine, and somehow, impossibly, a brilliant mathematician who just wants to teach has become the lightning rod for all of Alexandria's tensions. She represents everything the new Christian order wants to eliminate: learning without faith, authority without divine sanction, a woman who refuses to be silenced by gender, religion, or convention. Cyril's genius is making her seem more powerful than she actually is. In his sermons, he doesn't have to lie, he just has to emphasize certain truths. Yes, she influences the prefect. Look how Orestes defends her. Yes, she teaches in public. See how boldly she flaunts Christian modesty. Yes, students flock to her. Observe how she draws the faithful away from proper Christian instruction. Every fact becomes evidence. Every friendship becomes conspiracy. Every lesson becomes seduction. The polarization accelerates. Alexandria splits into camps. Those who see Hypatia as Alexandria's last great teacher, keeper of ancient wisdom, bridge between the old world and the new, and those who see her as an obstacle to Christian triumph, a pagan holdout corrupting the faithful, a woman who refuses to accept her proper place. There's no middle ground anymore, no room for nuance. You're either with the future or clinging to the past, and guess which side Hypatia represents. The delicate balance that once held Alexandria together, that beautiful fragile ecosystem where Greek philosophy and Egyptian wisdom and Roman law and Jewish scholarship and yes, even Christian theology could coexist and cross-pollinate, it's dying, being murdered by certainty, by the conviction that there's only one truth, one way, one acceptable path to knowledge. And in this new world of absolutes, there's no place for someone like Hypatia, no sanctuary for questions when everyone else has answers. She's not just teaching mathematics anymore. Whether she realizes it or not, every lesson has become an act of defiance. Every public appearance is a declaration that the old ways still matter. Every friendship with a Christian student proves that faith and reason don't have to be enemies. But Alexandria isn't interested in proof anymore. It wants purity, unity, the kind of clarity that can only come from eliminating everything that doesn't fit. And Hypatia, she definitely doesn't fit. Winter approaches, 414 AD, sliding toward 415. The tensions that have been building for months are reaching a breaking point. Cyril's followers grow bolder, Orestes grows more defensive, and Hypatia, still teaching, still believing that truth will protect her, that reason will prevail, that Alexandria's better angels will remember what made their city great. She has no idea that her time is running out, that the storm brewing around her is about to break with devastating final force. Chapter 5. Arms of Chaos. The Confrontation. March 415. Alexandria. The air feels different today, heavier somehow, like the city's holding its breath. Hypatia doesn't know it yet, but this afternoon will change everything. Not just for her, for the entire intellectual world. The mob is already gathering in the shadows. Peter the Lector's been whispering poison into eager ears for weeks. And somewhere across the city, Hypatia's getting ready for what she thinks is just another ordinary day. She has no idea what's coming. The morning starts like any other. Hypatia rises before dawn, reviews her notes for today's lectures. Mathematics first, then philosophy. A discussion on Plotinus maybe. Her students will have questions, they always do. She dresses in her scholar's robes, the simple white chiton that marks her as a teacher. A woman wearing the clothes of intellectual authority. In 415 Alexandria, that alone is enough to make enemies. But Hypatia's never been one to hide, never been one to apologize for her mind. Across the city, a different kind of gathering is taking place. Peter the Lector stands before a crowd of Christian monks, his face twisted with righteous fury. This is the man who will lead the charge. Fanatical, absolutely convinced he's doing God's work. She corrupts the youth, he tells them, teaches heresy, poisons minds with pagan lies. The crowd murmurs agreement. They've been building to this moment for months. Cyril's been feeding their anger, and now Peter's ready to act. Today, he tells them, Today they cleanse Alexandria. Hypatia finishes her morning meal, scrolls under her arm. Today she'll teach Apollonius's work on conic sections. Brilliant stuff. The kind of mathematics that reveals the hidden patterns of the universe. Her father would be proud. She climbs into her chariot, the same route she's taken for years, through the Jewish quarter, past the market, toward the Mausian. The streets feel normal, merchants hawking their wares, children playing, just another March day in the greatest city of the ancient world, or so it seems. But something's different today. Have you ever felt that moment when the air changes? When your skin prickles for no reason you can name? That's what hits Hypatia as her chariot rounds the corner near the Caesareum. Fewer people in the streets than usual. The ones who are there, they're watching her, following her progress with their eyes. Some duck into doorways when she looks their way. Her driver notices too. "Lady," he says quietly, "something's not right." She feels it, that electric tension before a storm breaks. Then she sees them. A group of men blocking the street ahead. Not merchants, not students. Monks. Maybe 20 of them. Standing in formation across the narrow road. Peter the lector at their centre. Hypatia's breath catches. She knows this man by reputation. Cyril's attack dog, the one who does the patriarch's dirty work. Her driver pulls the reins, slowing the chariot. "Turn around," she tells him. But it's too late. Behind them, more figures emerge from side streets. They're surrounded. The trap has been sprung. Hypatia. Peter's voice cuts through the afternoon air. Not shouting, not yet, but there's something in his tone that makes her blood run cold. "Step down from your chariot." She stays exactly where she is. This woman, who's debated the greatest minds of her age, isn't going to be intimidated by a mob of fanatics. "I have lectures to give," she says, her voice steady, authoritative, the same tone she uses with difficult students. But Peter isn't here to learn. "Your teaching days are over," he replies. The crowd grows. More monks appear from nowhere. Lay people too. Christians who've been listening to Cyril's sermons about the pagan witch who corrupts their city. They press closer. Hypatia can smell their unwashed bodies. See the wild gleam in their eyes. This isn't just anger. It's something deeper, primal, the kind of mob fury that turns ordinary people into monsters. "She blasphemes against Christ," someone shouts. "Teaches devil worship," cries another. The accusations fly, each one more ridiculous than the last. But reason doesn't matter to a mob. Hypatia looks for escape routes. None. The circle tightens. Her driver's already jumped down, melting into the crowd. Smart man. Self-preservation over loyalty. She doesn't blame him. "Come down willingly," Peter says, stepping closer to the chariot, "or we'll drag you down." His followers laugh. Ugly sounds. Hypatia's mind races. She could try to reason with them, appeal to their better nature. But looking into their faces, she realizes the truth. These men don't have better natures. Not anymore. Fanaticism has burned that out of them. They surge forward, hands grabbing at her, tearing at her scholar's robes. Hypatia fights back. Of course she does. This woman who never backed down from an intellectual challenge isn't going quietly. But there are too many of them. They drag her from the chariot. Her scrolls scatter in the dust. Mathematical proofs trampled underfoot. Centuries of learning ground into the dirt. They haul her upright. Peter's face inches from hers now. "Time to face judgment," he whispers. Then they start moving, dragging her toward the Caesareum church. The church doors loom ahead, dark, forbidding. Inside those walls, something terrible is about to happen. Hypatia knows it. The mob knows it. Even the few bystanders who haven't joined the frenzy, they know it too. Some turn away, can't watch what's coming. Others follow, drawn by the same morbid curiosity that makes people slow down at accident scenes. The greatest female scholar of the ancient world is being dragged to her doom, and Alexandria, the city that gave the world geometry and astronomy, just watches it happen. Inside the church, the mob's restraint finally snaps. What happens next is almost too brutal to describe. They strip away her clothes, her dignity, everything that marked her as a teacher, a scholar, a human being. The broken pottery comes out. Sharp fragments of old amphorae, ostraka, the same pottery shards used for ancient voting, now turned into weapons. Hypatia, who spent her life reaching for the stars, is brought down by the basest human instincts, the screaming echoes off stone walls. But it doesn't last long. Nothing that brutal ever does. When it's over, they drag what's left of her through the streets, a grotesque parade of religious triumph. Then to the outskirts of the city, the Cinnaron district, where they build a pyre. The flames consume everything, not just her body, but what she represented. The old world, the world where knowledge mattered more than faith, where questions were welcomed instead of feared, where a woman could teach mathematics to men and be respected for her mind. All of that burns with her. The smoke rises into the afternoon sky. But this isn't the end of the story. It's barely the beginning, because what happened that March afternoon in 415 will echo through history. Orestes, the Roman prefect, learns of the murder. Hypatia's students discover their teacher is gone. Word spreads through the intellectual community. The great library, already declining, takes another mortal blow. Scholars start packing their bags, planning their escapes from a city that's no longer safe for learning. The question isn't just what they did to Hypatia, it's what they did to civilization itself. Chapter 6. Tragedy in the Church. Hypatia's demise. March 415 AD. Alexandria. What happened next would echo through history as one of the darkest moments humanity has ever witnessed. Picture this, a brilliant woman, the greatest mind of her generation, about to become the victim of something so brutal, so senseless, that even 15 centuries later, we're still trying to make sense of it. This isn't just murder, this is the moment enlightenment died. That morning started like any other for Hypatia. She was 55 years old, still teaching, still drawing students from across the Roman world. Her chariot rolled through Alexandria's streets toward the great library. Same route she'd taken for decades. The city she loved. The city that loved her back, or so she thought. She had no idea that across town, a different kind of gathering was forming. Something darker. Cyril's words had been working like poison through the Christian community for months. This pagan woman teaching men and women together, influencing the prefect, practicing magic, they whispered, witchcraft. And here's the thing that gets me. She wasn't just any target. She was the symbol, the last great voice of the old world, the final flame they needed to snuff out to claim total victory. And they knew it. Peter the Lector, remember that name, he's the monk who gathered them. Hundreds of Christians, artisans, labourers, regular people whipped into a frenzy. They called themselves parabolani, hospital attendants turned religious militia. They'd done this before, destroyed temples, burned books, but today they wanted blood. They wanted Hypatia, and they knew exactly where to find her, on her way to teach. Like always, her chariot rounded the corner onto the main boulevard. That's when she saw them, a wall of faces. Angry, shouting, moving toward her like a tide. Her driver tried to turn around, too late. They swarmed the chariot, hands everywhere, grabbing, pulling. She fought. Of course she fought. But what's one woman against a mob of hundreds? They dragged her from her chariot. This brilliant mind, this teacher, this human being. Here's the detail that haunts me. They didn't just kill her in the street. That would have been too quick, too merciful. No, they dragged her to the Caesareum, the church. Think about that irony for a second. A place supposedly dedicated to love, to forgiveness, to Christ's message of peace. And that's where they brought her. That's where they decided to commit an act of such savagery that, God, even now, inside those sacred walls they stripped her naked. A final humiliation. This woman who'd spent her life clothed in dignity, in respect, in the robes of scholarship, reduced to nothing, vulnerable, human, and then they killed her with broken pottery shards. Ostraka, they called them. The same pieces used for voting in Athens, for democracy, for civilization, now turned into weapons of hate. The symbolism there, it's almost too much. I'm not going to describe what they did to her body. You can read the historical accounts if you need to, but what I will say is this. It wasn't just murder. It was obliteration. They wanted to erase her, every trace, every memory, her body torn apart, burned to ash, as if she'd never existed, as if her 40 years of teaching meant nothing, as if knowledge itself was the enemy. Word spread fast through Alexandria. The greatest mind in the city was dead, murdered in a church by Christians. Some people wept, others celebrated, and many just got very, very quiet because they understood what this meant. The rules had changed, violently, permanently. If they could do this to Hypatia, if someone that respected, that protected, could be torn apart like this, then nobody was safe. Orestes heard the news and broke. This was his teacher, his friend, the woman who'd shaped his mind, his understanding of the world. And he was the prefect of Alexandria, the Roman authority, the guy who was supposed to keep order, supposed to protect people. But he couldn't touch Peter the lector, couldn't arrest the mob, because they weren't just citizens anymore. They were God's army, untouchable. The exodus began immediately. Scholars packed their scrolls, their instruments, their lives, and they left Alexandria. Some went to Constantinople, others to Athens, anywhere but here. The great library started emptying, not from fire this time, not from war, but from fear, from the understanding that this city, this beacon of learning, had chosen darkness, had chosen violence, had chosen ignorance. What died with Hypatia that day wasn't just one woman. It was an entire world, the ancient world, the classical world, the world where questions mattered more than answers, where knowledge was sacred, where a woman could stand before men and teach them about the stars. That world, it bled out on a church floor in 415 AD, and we've been trying to get it back ever since. Think about what was lost. Not just Hypatia's unfinished work, her undiscovered theorems, her unwritten commentaries, but the students she would have taught, the minds she would have shaped, the questions she would have asked, the problems she would have solved, all of it erased by people who thought they were serving God, by turning a church into a slaughterhouse, by choosing fear over wonder. But here's the thing they didn't count on. You can murder the teacher, but you can't murder the idea. 1500 years later, we still remember her name, still tell her story, still rage at the injustice. Hypatia of Alexandria, mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, teacher, martyr, the woman who died so knowledge could live. And in a way, maybe that's the most beautiful thing of all. Chapter 7. Aftermath. A city in shock. Silence. That's what hits you first. Alexandria streets, empty. Not the usual empty of siesta or evening prayer. Something else. Something wrong. The kind of quiet that follows screaming, follows blood. The morning sun catches on broken pottery scattered near the Caesareum, still sharp, still stained. And somewhere in that silence, in those shadows between buildings, you can almost hear it, the echo of what just happened, the sound of a civilization cracking. Orestes paces his chambers like a caged animal. Back and forth, his hands shake, not from fear, but rage. Pure, helpless rage. She was under his protection, his friend, his teacher, and he did nothing, could do nothing. The prefect of Alexandria, powerless against a mob of fanatics. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees her face, hears her voice explaining some theorem he couldn't quite grasp. Now she's gone, and he's still here. The city wakes up slowly, cautiously, like a wounded animal testing whether it can still walk. Shopkeepers peer through cracked doors before opening. Children stay closer to their mothers. Even the usual chatter in the markets feels muted. Whispered, everyone knows something terrible happened. The details, those are spreading like wildfire. But the feeling that something fundamental just broke in their city, that's everywhere, in every glance, every careful step. You see it in faces. That look, confusion mixed with fear. Some citizens cross themselves when they pass the Caesareum. Others hurry past without looking. A few, a brave few, leave flowers where the blood was, where broken pottery still lies scattered. They don't stay long, can't afford to, but they leave something, a gesture, a silent protest against what this city just allowed to happen, what it just became complicit in. Her students gather in small groups, hollow-eyed, lost. They'd travelled from across the Roman world to study with her, left families, comfort, certainty, for what? To watch their teacher murdered by a mob. Demetrius can't stop crying. Marcus just stares at his notes, geometric proofs in her handwriting, theorems she'd shown them just days ago, now meaningless, or maybe more meaningful than ever. Hard to tell which hurts more. They keep waiting for her. That's the thing nobody talks about. Walking to the lecture hall out of habit, expecting her voice to fill the space like it always did, expecting her to solve whatever problem they'd been struggling with, but there's just nothing. Empty benches, dust motes dancing in afternoon light, the kind of silence that used to mean anticipation. Now it just means she's never coming back. Some try to continue her work. Poor Synesius attempts to lead a discussion on Platonic forms. His voice breaks halfway through. These aren't just students mourning a teacher. They're witnesses to something bigger. The murder of an idea. The idea that knowledge could transcend politics. That wisdom could exist alongside faith. That a woman could stand in front of men and teach them about the cosmos. All of that gone with her. The news spreads the way. News always does in Alexandria. Through the docks first. Sailors heading to Constantinople, Rome, Antioch. They carry more than cargo. They carry stories. And this story, this one's going to travel. A famous philosopher murdered by Christians. A woman torn apart for teaching. The mob that dragged genius through the streets. By evening, ships are leaving port with more than merchandise. They're carrying the end of an era. In private homes across the city, scrolls disappear. Books hide. Pagan texts that yesterday were treasured family heirlooms, tonight they're dangerous. Fathers burn libraries in their courtyards, not because they want to, because they have to. If they came for Hypatia, who's next? The message is clear, unmistakable. This is what happens to those who challenge the new order. This is what happens when you think too much. The Jewish quarter stays quiet. They know this game, know how quickly neighbours become enemies, how learning becomes heresy, how protection becomes privilege that can vanish overnight. They'd seen it before, would see it again, but watching it happen to someone like Hypatia, someone who'd never hurt anyone, who'd only wanted to understand the world, that hits different, makes them hold their children closer. Other scholars feel it too, that chill, that realization. If Hypatia isn't safe, if someone that respected, that protected, that brilliant, can be murdered in broad daylight, what about them? What about their small discoveries, their quiet questions, their dangerous thoughts? Some start packing. loading wagons, making excuses about family obligations in distant cities. Others burn their work, better safe than torn apart. The great library feels emptier, not because books are missing yet, but because the people who made those books meaningful are disappearing. Scholars don't just flee Alexandria, they flee inquiry itself. Why risk asking questions when questions get you killed? Why seek truth when truth makes you a target? The building stands, the scrolls remain, but the spirit, the hunger for knowledge, that's bleeding out onto the streets. By week's end, the story reaches Athens, Rome, Constantinople. Courts and salons across the empire are whispering her name, some in horror, some in secret admiration, but everyone knows what it means. The old world is dying, the world where philosophers mattered, where women could teach, where questions were welcome. Alexandria just announced the new rules, and those rules don't include people like Hypatia. This is how ages end, not with grand declarations or imperial decrees, but with one brilliant woman dragged from her chariot, one mob in one city on one March morning. Everything that comes after, the Dark Ages, the lost knowledge, the centuries of silence, it all starts here, in Alexandria, in the aftermath, in a city learning to live with what it just allowed, what it just became. Chapter 8. Flight of Wisdom. The pottery shards have been swept away, Hypatia's blood scrubbed from the church stones. But Orestes sits in his prefect's chair, staring at reports he cannot act upon. Peter the lector walks free. The mob that tore apart Alexandria's greatest mind, unpunished, untouchable. Cyril's people, the Roman Empire's most powerful prefect, reduced to a figurehead. Justice, dead as the woman whose brilliance once lit up this city, and everyone knows it. Picture Orestes that morning, waking to a world where murder masquerades as holy work, where dragging a philosopher naked through streets becomes God's will. His friend, his teacher, the woman who taught him to see mathematics as poetry, gone, and he can do nothing. Nothing. The killers attend morning prayers. They take communion. They sleep peacefully, while Alexandria's prefect lies awake, staring at shadows, knowing that power means nothing when faith becomes fanaticism. The news travels fast through Alexandria's intellectual circles, whispered in corners of the library, passed between students like a contagion. Hypatia is dead, murdered, and no one will pay. That's when the fear sets in. Real fear. If they can kill her, if they can butcher the most respected mind in Alexandria and face no consequences, who's safe? What scholar doesn't suddenly feel the weight of watching eyes? What pagan doesn't hear footsteps behind them in the dark? The exodus begins quietly. A geometry teacher from Antioch decides his work here is complete. A philosopher from Athens remembers urgent business at home. Hypatia's own students start disappearing. Not dramatically, no grand departures, just empty chairs in lecture halls. Scrolls packed hastily into travelling cases, doors left unlocked because there's no plan to return. Alexandria is bleeding minds, one brilliant departure at a time, the great intellectual magnet losing its pull. Here's what gets me about this moment. Alexandria had survived everything: Persian invasions, Roman conquest, earthquakes, fires, riots, political upheavals that toppled dynasties. But it couldn't survive this, the systematic driving out of its own thinkers. You can rebuild libraries, you can't rebuild the minds that filled them. And once those minds scatter to the winds, they don't come back, ever. The greatest intellectual centre in human history, hollowing out from within. Walk through the museum district now. Listen, the debates that once echoed from every courtyard, muted. The mathematical arguments that kept scholars up past midnight, silenced. Hypatia's own school stands empty, her students' questions hanging in the air like ghosts. the instruments she used to measure the stars, packed away, covered, as if knowledge itself has become dangerous, as if thinking too deeply, questioning too boldly, might summon the mob to your door. The great library feels the change most keenly. For 7 centuries it was the beating heart of human knowledge. Scholars came here like pilgrims, to study, to learn, to add their own discoveries to the endless scrolls. Now the reading rooms echo, whole sections sit unused. Librarians find themselves tending collections no one reads, cataloguing works no one dares to study. The silence is deafening, knowledge without seekers, wisdom without students, a library becoming a mausoleum. Some scholars try to stay, try to carry on. But how do you teach astronomy when questioning the heavens feels blasphemous? How do you explore mathematics when logic itself seems suspect? How do you discuss philosophy when the wrong conclusion might cost your life? The very air of Alexandria has changed, thick with suspicion, heavy with unspoken threats, free inquiry suffocated by the weight of watching eyes and listening ears. Damasius, one of Hypatia's former students, writes years later about this exodus. He calls it the flight of wisdom from the world. Hundreds of brilliant minds scattered like seeds on the wind, some to Constantinople, others to distant corners of the empire, a few to the growing Islamic centres where, ironically, their knowledge will be preserved. But Alexandria is left behind, emptied of the very thing that made it great. Its scholars refugees in their own discipline. The practical effects hit fast. No new astronomical observations, no advances in mathematics, no philosophical debates pushing human understanding forward. The great mechanical workshops, where Hypatia's inventions came to life, shuttered. The experimental laboratories, abandoned. The schools where geometry met poetry, where star charts met spiritual inquiry, closed. Alexandria, the city that gave the world the astrolabe, the compass, the foundations of algebra, going quiet. And Orestes? He watches it all unfold, powerless. Each departure a small defeat, each empty lecture hall another wound. The woman who taught him to see patterns in numbers, beauty in equations, wonder in the motion of planets, murdered, her killers walking free, her students fleeing, her work abandoned. He's witnessing the death of a civilization, the end of an age, and there's not a damn thing he can do to stop it. By summer's end, the transformation is complete. Alexandria, once the Rome of the mind, becomes just another provincial city. Its great debates replaced by sermons, its mathematical theorems by theological arguments, its star charts by prayer books. The city that mapped the heavens now looks only inward, the place where human knowledge reached its ancient peak, hollowed out, diminished, a shadow of what it was when Hypatia walked its streets. The saddest part? This wasn't inevitable. This wasn't some natural decline of empire or shift of trade routes. This was a choice, a deliberate strangling of the very thing that made Alexandria matter. The systematic replacement of inquiry with orthodoxy, of questions with answers that couldn't be questioned, of wonder with fear. Human civilization taking a step backward, choosing ignorance over understanding, darkness over light. But here's the thing about ideas, about knowledge, about the human drive to understand. You can murder the teacher, you can scatter the students, you can close the schools and burn the books. But somewhere, somehow, the questions survive, the wonder endures, the quest for truth finds new homes, new voices, new champions. Hypatia's Alexandria is dying, but her legacy, that's just beginning its journey through history, and that journey is far from over. Chapter 9. Fading Lights. The Fall of the Great Library. The silence after Hypatia's murder was deafening, not the peaceful quiet of concentrated study, the hollow silence of abandonment. Word spread through Alexandria like wildfire. The mathematician is dead, the philosopher is gone, and with her blood still staining the church stones, something else began to die. The great library, that magnificent beacon of human knowledge, started its final descent into darkness. This wasn't gradual decline anymore, this was collapse. Within days, you could feel it, the change. Scholars packed their belongings in the dead of night, rolled up their precious manuscripts, loaded donkeys with years of research. They'd seen what happened to Hypatia, brilliant, protected, beloved Hypatia. If she wasn't safe, nobody was. The exodus began quietly. A few at first, then dozens. These weren't just local teachers fleeing. These were the brightest minds from across the Mediterranean, Rome, Athens, Constantinople, all heading home, or anywhere else. Walk through the library complex now, and you'd barely recognize it. Those lecture halls where Hypatia once explained the movements of planets? Empty, chairs overturned, dust motes dancing in abandoned sunbeams. The mathematical instruments she'd used to demonstrate geometric principles? Still there, untouched, like someone had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. That's exactly what it felt like. A meal interrupted, a conversation cut off mid-sentence. Learning itself had been assassinated. The scrolls were the heartbreak, hundreds of thousands of them. Works by Archimedes, Euclid, Apollonius, commentaries on Plato and Aristotle that existed nowhere else on earth. They just sat there, gathering dust. No one copying them anymore. No students eager to learn from them. Some were already beginning to crumble. Papyrus doesn't last forever, especially when nobody's caring for it. Each day that passed, humanity's collective knowledge faded a little more. A handful of scholars remained, the stubborn ones, the ones who couldn't imagine life anywhere else. They'd shuffle through the halls like ghosts, clutching their remaining manuscripts, whispering to each other in corners, afraid to speak too loudly about mathematics or astronomy. You know why? Because those subjects were becoming dangerous, associated with paganism, with the old ways, with Hypatia herself. Science was turning into heresy. Knowledge was becoming rebellion. The Christian mobs grew bolder. They'd march past the library complex, shouting about pagan corruption, about the devil's mathematics. Some carried hammers and crowbars. They weren't there to debate philosophy, they were there to end it. The few remaining scholars would lock their doors, hide their books, pray the mob would pass by today. This is how civilizations die, not with armies and sieges, with fear, with silence, with brilliant minds forced into hiding. Think about what was vanishing. Hypatia's commentaries on Apollonius, mathematical theories that wouldn't be rediscovered for 1,000 years, astronomical observations collected over centuries, medical texts with treatments and cures, engineering manuals for building aqueducts and harbours, all of it slipping away because what? Because learning had become politically dangerous, because knowledge threatened the new order. This wasn't just Alexandria's loss, this was humanity's. The decline accelerated like a stone rolling downhill. Fewer students meant fewer fees. Fewer fees meant less money for maintenance. Less maintenance meant the buildings started falling apart, roof tiles cracking, rain seeping in, damaging precious scrolls, stone foundations shifting, windows broken and left unrepaired. The physical decay matched the intellectual collapse, beauty rotting from the inside out, glory crumbling into ruin. Remember what this place used to be. Just decades earlier, students travelled from across the known world to study here. The halls buzzed with debate in a dozen languages. Mathematical proofs covered every wall. Astronomical instruments gleamed in the workshops. Scholars collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The library wasn't just a collection of books. It was the beating heart of civilization itself. And now it was dying. One by one, the last scholars made their choice. Pack up, leave, Some went to Constantinople, where learning was still tolerated. Others to Baghdad, where Muslim scholars were just beginning to collect and translate ancient wisdom. A few sailed west to Italy or Gaul. They took what manuscripts they could carry, left the rest to decay. These weren't just career moves. These were refugees fleeing intellectual persecution. Knowledge itself had become homeless. The buildings themselves told the story. Lecture halls where weeds grew through cracked floors. Study rooms with broken furniture and shattered windows. The great reading room where thousands of scrolls once lined the walls. Now maybe a few dozen remained. Mice had gotten into some. Others had simply disintegrated. Pages turned to powder at a touch. Words dissolving into dust. Literally, centuries of human thought crumbling away. This was how the Dark Ages began. Not with a bang. With a whimper. With empty classrooms and silent laboratories. With questions nobody dared ask anymore. With books nobody dared read. The light of learning that had burned bright in Alexandria for 7 centuries was finally flickering out. And in that growing darkness, superstition and ignorance began to flourish. Knowledge retreated. Fear advanced. Progress stopped. By 450 AD, barely 30 years after Hypatia's murder, the great library was finished. Oh, the building still stood. Some scrolls remained, but the spirit was gone. The community of scholars had scattered. The tradition of learning had been broken. What took centuries to build was destroyed in a generation. This wasn't just the end of the library. This was the end of the ancient world. Hypatia's death had been the beginning of the end. Her blood on those church stones marked more than the murder of one brilliant woman. It marked the triumph of ignorance over knowledge, fear over curiosity, mob rule over rational discourse. The great library's fall was her final tragedy. She'd spent her life defending learning. In death, she watched it die with her. The lights were going out all over the ancient world. Chapter 10. The Turning Tide. End of an era. Something massive shifted when Hypatia died, not just in Alexandria, across the entire Mediterranean world. You have to understand, this wasn't just about one brilliant woman getting murdered by fanatics. This was civilizations changing hands. The classical world, that whole Greek and Roman way of thinking, questioning, exploring, it was bleeding out in the streets with her, and everyone knew it. The scholars, the politicians, even the Christians who ordered her death. They all understood what was ending that day in 415. Think about it this way. For nearly 1,000 years, Alexandria had been the intellectual capital of the world. The place where brilliant minds gathered to push human knowledge forward. Mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, engineering, all of it flourishing under one roof. But Hypatia's murder? That was the moment when raw religious power looked intellectual curiosity in the eye and said, "No more. We're done with your questions. We're done with your theories. We're done with women teaching men. Submit or die." And most chose to run. The exodus started almost immediately. Within weeks of Hypatia's death, scholars were packing their scrolls and fleeing Alexandria. Some headed east to Constantinople, others west to Rome, or even further into Gaul. They took their students with them, their books, their instruments, their entire way of life, because they understood something we sometimes forget. Knowledge isn't just ideas floating in the air. It's people, living, breathing, thinking people, and when those people get scared enough to leave, the knowledge leaves with them. Alexandria started dying that spring. Picture the great library after they left. Still standing, sure. Still had its columns and reading rooms, but empty. Scrolls gathering dust. No more heated debates echoing through the halls. No more students copying mathematical proofs by lamplight. No more late-night conversations about the nature of reality. Just silence. And slowly, very slowly, decay creeping in. Because buildings without purpose don't last long. Neither do cities built around ideas when the ideas get banned. Alexandria was becoming a ghost of itself, the intellectual heart of the world just stopping. But here's what's really haunting about this moment. It wasn't just Alexandria dying, it was an entire way of thinking about the world. For centuries, the classical mind had believed in observation, evidence, questioning authority, testing theories against reality, human reason as a tool for understanding the universe. That whole approach, it was being replaced by something completely different. Faith over facts, authority over inquiry, revealed truth over discovered truth. The age of asking why was ending. The age of saying because God wills it was beginning. You can see it happening across the Roman world. Libraries closing, schools shutting down, philosophers going silent or converting, mathematical and scientific texts being lost or destroyed. Not through war or natural disaster, through deliberate neglect, through active hostility toward learning itself. Because the new Christian authorities didn't just want political power. They wanted to control how people thought, what questions they could ask, what answers they could accept. And the classical tradition, with all its messy curiosity and inconvenient questions, that had to go. The irony is brutal. Christianity had originally spread through the Roman world, partly because it welcomed everyone, rich and poor, slave and free, men and women. It was inclusive in ways the old pagan religions weren't. But once it gained power, once it became the official religion of the empire, it started acting like every other authoritarian system, crushing dissent, silencing opposition, demanding total intellectual submission. The religion of love was becoming the religion of control, and brilliant minds like Hypatia's, they were the first casualties of that transformation. What gets me is how quickly it all unravelled. Ancient learning hadn't just survived for centuries, it had thrived, built on itself. Each generation of scholars standing on the shoulders of the previous one, creating this incredible accumulation of human knowledge and wisdom. But institutional memory is fragile. Break the chain of transmission just once. Let one generation of teachers disappear without training the next, and centuries of accumulated wisdom can vanish in a decade. That's what happened after Hypatia died. The chain broke, the darkness fell, and it wasn't just abstract knowledge disappearing. Practical skills too, engineering techniques, medical procedures, agricultural methods, navigation tools, all the stuff that made Roman civilization actually work. Because the same intellectual curiosity that drove pure mathematics also drove practical innovation. When you kill the curiosity, you kill the innovation too. The Roman world started forgetting how to maintain its own infrastructure, how to cure diseases their ancestors had understood, how to build the great works that had defined their civilization. The lights were going out. Some historians call what came next the Dark Ages. Others prefer early medieval period. Sounds less judgmental, but honestly, when you look at what was lost, dark isn't unfair. For the next several centuries, European intellectual life would be dominated by copying scripture and arguing about doctrine. Scientific innovation would slow to a crawl. Mathematical advancement would stagnate. Philosophical inquiry would be channeled into narrow theological questions. The kind of broad, fearless curiosity that Hypatia represented, that would become almost extinct in the West. Almost, because here's the thing. Knowledge is stubborn. It wants to survive. While Europe was forgetting how to think, Islamic scholars were preserving and expanding on classical learning, translating Greek texts, building on mathematical discoveries, pushing astronomy forward, developing new medical techniques. In Baghdad and Cairo and Cordoba, the intellectual tradition that died in Alexandria was being reborn. Different language, different religion. Same fundamental curiosity about how the world works. The light hadn't gone out everywhere, just most places in the West. But that's centuries in the future. In 415, watching the scholars flee Alexandria. Nobody knew Islamic civilization would preserve what Christian Europe was destroying. All they could see was ending. The last pagan philosophers packing their books. The last independent thinkers going silent. The last woman bold enough to teach men disappearing in the most brutal way possible. The classical world, that whole magnificent experiment in human reason and inquiry, was bleeding out in the streets of Alexandria, and everyone who cared about learning was running for their lives. Hypatia's murder became the perfect symbol for this transition. Not just because of who she was, brilliant mathematician, fearless philosopher, inspiring teacher, but because of how she died, torn apart by a mob convinced they were doing God's work. Reason literally ripped to pieces by religious fanaticism. Her body destroyed, her books scattered, her students scattered, everything she represented, intellectual freedom, women's rights to learn and teach, the value of secular knowledge, all of it dying with her in that church in Alexandria. So when we talk about the end of the classical age, when we try to pinpoint that moment when the ancient world became the medieval world, Hypatia's death is as good a marker as any. March 415 AD, the day intellectual courage met religious extremism and lost. The day curiosity about the natural world became heresy. The day asking questions became dangerous. The classical age didn't end with barbarian invasions or imperial collapse. It ended with broken pottery and mob violence. It ended with brilliant women being silenced forever. Her death became something bigger than just another murder in Alexandria's violent streets. Hypatia didn't just die, she became a symbol, a martyr. The woman who stood up to religious extremism and paid the ultimate price. And here's what's haunting about it. Her murder wasn't random violence. It was calculated, organized, a message sent by men who feared what she represented. Knowledge without boundaries, learning without limits, a mind that refused to be silenced. Think about what they destroyed that day in March 415. Not just a person, but an entire way of thinking. Hypatia was the last great teacher of the ancient world. When they killed her, they killed something else. The idea that knowledge belongs to everyone, that women can be scholars, that reason matters more than blind faith. They thought they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they created a legend that would outlast them all. The timing tells you everything. Alexandria had been the intellectual capital of the world for 700 years. The great library, the museum, scholars from across the empire coming to study and debate. And now, Christian mobs roaming the streets with pottery shards, hunting down anyone who dared think differently. Hypatia's murder wasn't just personal, it was the death knell of an entire civilization. The ancient world ending with blood on church steps. Her students scattered after the murder. Some fled Alexandria entirely, others just stopped teaching, stopped learning, stopped asking dangerous questions. The Neoplatonic school she'd led for 20 years, gone within months. The mathematical innovations she'd been working on, lost forever. This is what religious extremism does. It doesn't just kill people, it kills ideas. It kills the future. It kills the part of humanity that reaches for something better. But here's what Cyril and his mob couldn't kill. Memory, stories, the idea of her. Because even as Alexandria crumbled, even as the library emptied, people remembered the woman who wore philosopher's robes and taught mathematics to anyone willing to learn. They remembered her courage, her brilliance, her refusal to back down when the world demanded her silence. Martyrs don't die, they just change form. They become something larger than themselves. The contrast is stark, and it's intentional. As Christianity grew stronger in Alexandria, intellectual life withered. Not coincidence, not parallel evolution, direct causation. The same energy that built magnificent churches was destroying laboratories and libraries. The same passion that filled monasteries was emptying classrooms. Hypatia stood at that crossroads. watching the old world die and the new one being born in violence. She chose her side. She paid the price. What makes her story so powerful is how completely it captures this moment in history. The last pagan philosopher, the final female scholar, the end of ancient learning, all wrapped up in one brutal murder on one March morning. She wasn't just killed for being a woman, or being pagan, or being too smart. She was killed for representing everything Christianity wanted to erase. Free inquiry, secular education, women's voices, the dangerous idea that truth comes from thinking, not faith. Her legacy grew in ways her killers never expected. Medieval chroniclers, even Christian ones, struggled with her story. How do you justify murdering someone whose only crime was teaching mathematics, whose students loved her, whose discoveries advanced human knowledge? They couldn't, so they tried to forget her. But you can't forget someone who died for ideas. Ideas have a way of surviving their enemies, of coming back when the world is ready. The Renaissance rediscovered her. Scientists and philosophers saw in Hypatia everything they were fighting for: the right to question, to experiment, to follow evidence wherever it leads. She became a patron saint of reason in an age that desperately needed one, not because she was perfect, but because she died defending something essential: the human mind's freedom to think without permission from authority, religious or otherwise. Modern feminists claimed her too. And why wouldn't they? Here was a woman who refused every limitation her society placed on her, who wore men's clothes, taught men and women equally, never married, never had children, never apologized for taking up space in a man's world. She paid for that defiance with her life. But her example echoed through centuries, inspiring women to claim their own right to think, to learn, to speak, to be heard. What's tragic is how preventable it all was. Hypatia tried to bridge worlds. She taught Christians and pagans alike. She sought common ground between faith and reason. She believed knowledge could unite rather than divide. But extremism doesn't want bridges. It wants purity. Total victory. Complete submission. Her murder proved that when fanaticism takes hold, even the most brilliant minds, even the most generous spirits can't survive the purge. The parallels to our world are uncomfortable and obvious. Intellectuals targeted for their ideas, women silenced for speaking out, education undermined by ideology, libraries and laboratories threatened by those who prefer ignorance to inconvenient truths. Hypatia's story isn't ancient history. It's a warning, a reminder of what we lose when we let fear and hatred triumph over curiosity and courage, when we stop defending the right to think differently. So she stands now, as she stood then, defiant, brilliant, uncompromising, the martyr of reason, the woman who chose knowledge over safety, truth over survival, principle over life itself. Her killers are forgotten. Their names survive only because they murdered her. But she endures, in every scientist who asks dangerous questions, every woman who refuses to be silenced, every person who believes thinking is not a crime. That's Hypatia's real legacy, not the mathematics she discovered or the students she taught, though those matter. Her legacy is the idea she died for. That knowledge belongs to everyone. That truth doesn't care about your religion, your gender, your politics. That the human mind, free and unafraid, can solve any problem, answer any question, build any future. They killed her body. But the idea lives forever. Chapter 12. The Scholar in Shadow. Forgotten Stories of Hypatia. You know her as the woman murdered by a mob. But here's what they don't tell you. Before that brutal March day in 415, Hypatia was inventing things, creating tools that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. Take her hydrometer, this brilliant device that could measure the density of liquids. She's literally advancing science while wearing a toga in Alexandria, 1500 years before anyone else figures this out. This woman wasn't just teaching philosophy, She was pushing the boundaries of what humans could know. Picture this. Every morning, Hypatia gets dressed, but not in the flowing robes and veils that society expects. She puts on male scholars' clothing, the Hypatian, the pallium, the uniform of serious thinkers, and then she walks through Alexandria's streets to her school. People stare. Women aren't supposed to dress like this. They're certainly not supposed to teach publicly. But Hypatia, she's making a statement with every step. This isn't costume, this is armor. She's claiming her right to be taken seriously in a world that wants to silence her. Her teaching style was unconventional. Most philosophers back then would sit in their chairs and lecture. Students would take notes and stay quiet. Hypatia threw that out completely. She'd walk among her students, questioning them, challenging them, making them defend their ideas. She turned learning into a conversation. And here's the wild part. She taught men and women together, in the same room, discussing the same complex ideas. This was revolutionary. Women weren't supposed to have opinions about mathematics or astronomy. Hypatia was proving they absolutely could. A typical day in Hypatia's life started before dawn. She'd study mathematical texts by lamplight, working through complex geometric proofs. Then breakfast, simple bread and wine. By mid-morning, her students would arrive. Some travelled hundreds of miles just to learn from her. She'd spend hours explaining Euclid's theorems, then shift to Ptolemy's astronomy. Lunch was often forgotten when she got caught up in a particularly interesting problem. Evening found her working on her own research, improving existing theories, developing new ones. Sleep came late, if at all. Her students adored her, and that's not just ancient biographer flattery. You can see it in how they wrote about her later. They called her divine, not because they worshipped her, but because her mind seemed otherworldly. She could explain the most complex mathematical concepts in ways that suddenly made sense. Geometry became beautiful under her teaching. Astronomy turned into poetry. Some of her students were Christians, which was remarkable. They'd risk their standing in the church just to study under this pagan woman. That tells you everything about her brilliance. Hypatia didn't just break rules, she obliterated them. Women were supposed to stay home. She created a public school. Women weren't supposed to speak to men outside their family. She taught mixed classes. Women definitely weren't supposed to write letters to government officials about policy. Hypatia regularly corresponded with the Roman prefect Orestes about city governance. She offered advice on everything from trade disputes to judicial matters. This wasn't just academic freedom. This was a woman claiming political influence in a society determined to keep her silent and invisible. Beyond the hydrometer, Hypatia was constantly tinkering. She improved the design of the astrolabe, making it more precise for celestial navigation. She developed new methods for solving algebraic equations that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries. Her work on conic sections advanced understanding of parabolas and ellipses. This wasn't just theoretical math, these were practical tools for engineers, architects, astronomers. She was essentially running a research and development lab in ancient Alexandria, creating innovations that could have revolutionized technology if her work had survived the coming chaos. Her astronomical observations were meticulous. Hypatia would spend entire nights tracking planetary movements, recording positions, calculating orbits. She was trying to understand the mathematical relationships governing celestial mechanics. This was centuries before telescopes, remember. She's doing this with naked eye observations and brilliant geometric reasoning. Her star charts were more accurate than anything available. Sailors and traders would consult her calculations for navigation. She was essentially running Alexandria's unofficial space program, one woman with extraordinary vision, mapping the cosmos from her rooftop. As a Neoplatonist philosopher, Hypatia taught that mathematics was the pathway to understanding divine truth. Numbers weren't just calculations, they were the language of creation itself. She'd show students how geometric proofs revealed eternal principles, how astronomical patterns reflected cosmic harmony. This wasn't dry academic theory. She made philosophy come alive through mathematics. Her students learned that studying conic sections was actually studying the mind of God, that solving equations was a form of prayer. She turned her school into a temple of reason. The challenges never stopped coming. City officials questioned her right to teach. Religious leaders condemned her pagan beliefs. Even some of her male colleagues resented her success. Students had to sneak to her classes sometimes, afraid of being seen associating with a controversial woman. She received death threats. People vandalized her school, but Hypatia never backed down. She'd arrive each morning, put on those scholars' robes, and continue teaching, because she believed knowledge was more important than safety. That truth was worth defending, even if it cost everything. Her influence rippled through Alexandria's intellectual community. Other scholars started questioning why women couldn't participate in academic life. Some began including females in their research. A few brave women attempted to start their own schools. Hypatia had cracked open a door that patriarchal society desperately wanted to keep shut. Even Christians who disagreed with her philosophy respected her intellect. She proved that brilliance had no gender, that wisdom could come from anyone willing to dedicate their life to learning. She was reshaping what Alexandria thought possible. Walking into Hypatia's school felt different. Students described an atmosphere of pure intellectual excitement. Questions were encouraged, not forbidden. Doubt was seen as the beginning of wisdom, not a sign of weakness. She created a space where minds could explore freely, where mathematical beauty and philosophical truth intersected, where Christians, pagans, and skeptics could learn together. In a city increasingly torn apart by religious hatred, her school was an oasis of rational discourse, a glimpse of what human civilization could be at its best. The books she wrote, most are lost now, but contemporary sources mention her commentaries on Apollonius, her revisions of Ptolemy, her original work on algebraic methods. She was building a bridge between classical Greek mathematics and the future, training the next generation of scholars, preserving knowledge that might otherwise disappear. Every equation she solved, every theorem she proved, every student she taught, was an act of resistance against the growing darkness of ignorance. She was fighting to keep the light of learning alive in an increasingly hostile world. By 415, tensions in Alexandria were reaching a breaking point. Religious extremism was growing bolder. Secular authority was weakening, and Hypatia, brilliant, defiant, uncompromising Hypatia, had become a symbol of everything the fanatics wanted to destroy. Pagan learning, female independence, rational thought over blind faith. She must have sensed the danger closing in, but she kept teaching, kept inventing, kept pushing boundaries, because some things are worth dying for, and she was about to prove that knowledge, true knowledge, is one of them. Chapter 13. The Silent Echo. Hypatia, in modern perspective. Here's what's wild about history. Sometimes a single death echoes across centuries, getting louder instead of quieter. Hypatia died in 415 AD. Brutal, final, but somehow her voice kept travelling through medieval darkness, through Renaissance light, through modern struggles we're still fighting today. That mob thought they were silencing dangerous ideas. Instead, they created something much more powerful, a symbol, a rallying cry, a ghost that refuses to stay buried. Fast forward 1500 years. Early feminists are dusting off forgotten names, looking for heroes who came before. And there she is, Hypatia, the woman who dared to teach men, who wore scholars' robes instead of staying home, who died for thinking too freely. Suddenly she's not just an ancient tragedy. She's proof that women have always belonged in mathematics, philosophy, science, that the barriers we're fighting aren't natural law, they're just choices, bad ones. The timing matters. When Mary Wollstonecraft wrote about women's rights in 1792, when the first women started demanding university admission in the 1800s, when Marie Curie fought for recognition, they needed historical ammunition. Evidence that brilliant women weren't freaks of nature. Hypatia provided that evidence. See, here's one who mastered mathematics when your great-great-grandfather couldn't even read. Here's one who invented scientific instruments. Here's one who taught publicly, fearlessly, until they killed her for it. But here's where it gets complicated, because turning Hypatia into a feminist icon sometimes means turning her into something she wasn't. The real Hypatia lived in a different world, different rules. She wasn't fighting for women's liberation. She was just being brilliant, living her life, teaching her students, the political stuff, the gender barriers, the religious tensions. That was the world reacting to her, not her trying to change the world, though maybe that's more powerful. Think about it this way. Every woman who's walked into a boardroom, a lab, a courtroom where she doesn't belong, she's walking in Hypatia's footsteps. Not because Hypatia planned it that way, but because her example proves something crucial. Intelligence isn't gendered. Curiosity isn't male. Discovery doesn't care about your biology. The barriers are artificial, always have been. When they killed Hypatia, they admitted something important. They were afraid of what she represented, threatened by her very existence. Modern scientists love her for different reasons. She represents pure intellectual curiosity, the kind that doesn't care about practical applications, doesn't worry about funding, doesn't calculate political risk. She studied conic sections because they were beautiful, mapped star movements because they mattered, built instruments because she could. That's the scientist's dream. Knowledge for its own sake, understanding because understanding is everything, before politics corrupted everything, before science became a weapon, when learning was still sacred. And here's what's haunting. The same forces that killed Hypatia, they're still out there. Different faces, same impulse. The fear of questions, the hatred of complexity, the need to silence voices that threaten simple answers. Look around. Scientists getting death threats for climate research, teachers attacked for teaching evolution, experts dismissed as elites, complexity labelled as conspiracy, facts called fake news. The mob that dragged Hypatia from her chariot, it never really disbanded, just changed costumes. Religious extremism, that's what killed her, and it's what modern people see most clearly. Not Christianity itself, but the moment when faith becomes fanaticism, when belief demands blood, when different ideas aren't just wrong, they're evil, worthy of destruction. Hypatia's murder wasn't theological, it was psychological, the ancient human terror of being wrong, of having your worldview challenged, of learning that maybe, just maybe, you don't understand everything. Some people kill that feeling, others embrace it. Modern Alexandria would probably horrify her. Not the city itself, but what we've lost. That sense of intellectual adventure, that willingness to gather knowledge from everywhere, argue with everyone, test everything. Ancient Alexandria was messy, chaotic, dangerous, but it was alive with ideas. Today we sort ourselves into echo chambers, read only what confirms what we already believe. Ancient people travelled thousands of miles to argue with Hypatia. We won't even follow someone on Twitter who disagrees with us. But here's the thing about symbols. They grow beyond the person they started from. Hypatia the woman was brilliant, brave, ultimately human. Hypatia the symbol is something bigger. She's every question silenced by dogma, every discovery suppressed by politics, every voice drowned out by the mob. She's the part of us that refuses to stop asking why, that keeps pushing boundaries even when boundaries push back, that chooses truth over comfort, complexity over simplicity, questions over answers. The parallels to our time are impossible to ignore. Social media mobs destroying careers, politicians attacking science, religious extremists targeting educators, women in STEM still fighting for respect, recognition, safety. The tools have changed, the human nature behind them. Hypatia's murder was the first recorded case of a scholar lynched for her ideas. Sadly, it wasn't the last. History doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes, and some rhymes are tragedies. What would she think of us now? Of women running tech companies, leading space missions, winning Nobel Prizes? Part of her would be amazed. Look how far we've come, how many barriers we've broken, how many minds we've opened. But part of her might be disappointed, because we had all these advantages: education, communication, historical perspective, and we're still making the same mistakes, still choosing fear over curiosity, still silencing voices that make us uncomfortable. Maybe that's why her story matters more now than ever, not as ancient history, but as current events. Every time we choose complexity over simplicity, questions over certainty, evidence over emotion, we're honouring her memory. Every woman who speaks up in a meeting, every scientist who publishes inconvenient data, every teacher who encourages critical thinking, they're all part of her legacy, living proof that the mob didn't win, that ideas survive their authors, that truth eventually outlasts violence. In the end, Hypatia's greatest achievement wasn't any theorem or invention. It was becoming immortal. Not in body, but in spirit, in the principle she represents, the refusal to be silenced, the commitment to keep learning, keep teaching, keep questioning, even when it's dangerous, especially when it's dangerous. They killed the woman, but the idea, the example, the inspiration, that's still here, still spreading, still echoing through time. Some voices can't be killed, some lights won't go out. Chapter 14. Reclaiming the Light. Hypatia's Resurgence. Something strange happened to Hypatia of Alexandria over the centuries. The woman they tried to erase, she came back, not as flesh and blood, obviously, but as something bigger, something they never expected when they dragged her from that chariot in 415 AD. They thought they were snuffing out a dangerous light. Instead, they created a symbol, a rallying cry. Today, 1500 years later, Hypatia is everywhere. Scientists claim her. Feminists march with her name on banners. How does a murdered mathematician become a modern icon? It started slowly. A mention here, a reference there. Scholars rediscovering her in dusty manuscripts. But then the 20th century happened. Women entered universities. Science exploded. Space exploration began. Suddenly, people needed heroes who looked like possibility, who represented what could be achieved when minds run free. Hypatia fit perfectly. Ancient yet timeless. Brilliant yet brutally silenced. The perfect martyr for reason. The perfect champion for anyone fighting to think freely. Her resurrection had begun. Carl Sagan changed everything. In 1980, Cosmos aired on television. 13 episodes, hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide. And there, in episode 13, Sagan told Hypatia's story, not as a footnote, as the tragic climax of ancient learning's destruction. The last scientist who worked in the Library of Alexandria, he called her, his voice breaking slightly as he described her murder. That single moment, it introduced Hypatia to the world. Suddenly everyone knew her name. The revival had its prophet. Carl Sagan was bringing her home. Scientists grabbed onto Hypatia like she was oxygen. Here was one of their own, ancient proof that brilliant minds have always pushed boundaries, asked questions, sought truth. Astronomers named an asteroid after her. Number 238 Hypatia, spinning through space. Mathematical societies honoured her memory. She appeared on stamps, currency, monuments. Why this hunger for her story? Because scientists know what it's like to be attacked for thinking differently, to have your work called dangerous. Hypatia understood that price. She paid it with her life. She became their patron saint of curiosity. For feminists, Hypatia was pure gold, a woman who refused every limitation of her time, who wore men's clothes, taught publicly, led a philosophical school, advised politicians, remained unmarried and childless by choice. She did everything women were told they couldn't do, and she did it brilliantly. 1500 years before women's liberation, Hypatia was already liberated. Her murder became more than ancient history. It became a warning, a reminder of what happens when women get too powerful, too visible, too dangerous to the status quo. Her story was their story. The novels came next. Authors couldn't resist her story. Charles Kingsley wrote Hypatia in 1853, dramatised, romanticised, but it put her name in parlours across England. Then came the serious historical fiction, Amin Malouf's The Gardens of Light, Key Longfellow's The Secret Magdalene, each book adding layers to her legend. Some got the history right, others twisted it beyond recognition, but it didn't matter. Every novel, every story, every poem about Hypatia was another resurrection, another chance for her voice to echo through time. Fiction was keeping her alive. Hollywood finally noticed. 2009 brought Agora, Alejandro Amenabar's film, starring Rachel Weisz as Hypatia. Not historically perfect, but visually stunning. It showed her teaching, inventing, questioning the cosmos. Her death wasn't sanitized. The violence was real, brutal. The film flopped commercially, but found its audience. Other productions followed. BBC documentaries, stage plays, web series, each interpretation different, but all asking the same question. How do we honour someone whose light was snuffed out for shining too brightly? Visual media was making her face unforgettable. Universities rediscovered her too. Academic conferences dedicated to her work. New research into her mathematical contributions. Scholars arguing over her astronomical theories. Was she the last great thinker of Alexandria? The first feminist philosopher? The bridge between ancient and medieval thought? The debates raged. Academic journals filled with papers about her. Graduate students wrote dissertations on her influence. She became a cottage industry in classical studies. Not bad for someone whose writings didn't survive. Her absence was becoming as powerful as her presence had been. Why does Hypatia matter so much to us? Maybe because we recognize our own world in hers. The same battles are still being fought. Reason versus fanaticism. Science versus superstition. Women's voices versus enforced silence. Religious extremism versus intellectual freedom. Her Alexandria feels uncomfortably familiar. The mob that killed her, we've seen their descendants. Different clothes, same fury. Different weapons, same target. Anyone who thinks too freely, questions too deeply, refuses to stay silent when truth is under attack. Hypatia's fight is still our fight. There's irony here, though. The men who murdered Hypatia wanted her forgotten, erased, her books burned, her school closed, her students scattered. They succeeded for about 1,000 years. But then something they never anticipated happened. Her martyrdom became more powerful than her life ever was. Her silence became louder than her voice. Her absence created a hunger for her presence. They thought they were burying dangerous ideas. Instead, they planted seeds. Seeds that would grow into something they could never have imagined. Hypatia's posthumous revenge was complete. Artists fell in love with her story. Painters created images of her teaching, dying, ascending. Raphael included her in his School of Athens, the only woman among the philosophers. Composers wrote symphonies about her. Sculptors carved her likeness in marble. She became the muse for creative minds across centuries. Why? Because artists understand persecution. They know what it means to create something the world isn't ready to accept. Hypatia's struggle to make beautiful, true things in a hostile world that spoke directly to every creative soul who ever faced censorship, suppression, violence, She became more than a person. She became a principle. The right to ask questions. The right to seek truth. The right to teach what you've discovered. Universities put her name on buildings, libraries, research centres, the Hypatia Society, the Hypatia Foundation, organisations dedicated to supporting women in science and mathematics. Her name became shorthand for intellectual courage, for standing up when standing up might get you killed. A rallying cry for everyone who ever had their ideas attacked, their research suppressed, their voices silenced by those afraid of what they might say. The parallels are everywhere. Scientists fired for inconvenient research, professors attacked for teaching evolution, climate change, history that makes people uncomfortable, women in STEM facing harassment, discrimination, threats, journalists murdered for asking the wrong questions. The names and faces change. The fundamental conflict remains the same. Curiosity versus control, knowledge versus power, free inquiry versus enforced ignorance. Every time someone stands up for truth and gets knocked down, they're walking in Hypatia's footsteps. Her path is still being travelled. Her light is still being carried forward. In the end, Hypatia won. Not the battle, she lost that one badly. But the war, her murderers are forgotten footnotes. She's the one remembered, celebrated, honoured. Her mathematical insights live on in textbooks. Her courage inspires new generations of thinkers. Her refusal to be silenced echoes through every classroom where dangerous questions get asked. They tried to snuff out her light. Instead, they scattered sparks. Now her flame burns brighter than ever, in every mind that chooses curiosity over comfort, truth over safety. The light they tried to extinguish illuminates the world. Chapter 15, The Immortal Flame. Hypatia's Enduring Legacy. March 415 AD feels like yesterday when you're standing in modern Alexandria. The mob is gone, the broken pottery, the screams, the burning flesh, all dust now. But walk these streets today and something's different. Something survived that they couldn't kill. You can feel it in the Mediterranean breeze off the harbour, in the way sunlight hits the ancient stones. Hypatia's voice, still whispering, still teaching, still refusing to be silenced after 16 centuries. Alexandria today isn't the intellectual capital it once was. The great library, gone. The museum, ruins. The scholars who once flocked here from across the known world. They found other places to think dangerous thoughts. But here's what's wild about this city. It remembers. Walk past a coffee shop and you'll see her name on a plaque. A small memorial where the Serapeum once stood. Like the city itself is trying to apologize. Trying to say, we know what we lost. The irony hits you standing here. This place that murdered its greatest teacher, it's now desperately trying to reclaim her memory. New Alexandria Library opened in 2002, gleaming glass and steel rising from the harbour like a promise. Like maybe we learnt something from that March day in 415. Maybe we understand now what happens when fear silences brilliance, when politics murders mathematics, when mobs decide who gets to speak and who gets to think. But Hypatia's real resurrection? It didn't happen in Alexandria. It happened everywhere else. Start counting and you'll lose track. Hypatia Avenue in Athens. The Hypatia Institute in Madrid. Research centres in Boston, Toronto, Sao Paulo. Women's colleges, mathematics departments, astronomy labs. All carrying her name like a torch passed hand to hand across the centuries. Each one saying the same thing. They killed her. But they couldn't kill what she represented. Here's what gets me about her legacy. She's become bigger in death than she ever was in life. In 415, she taught maybe 100 students. Today, millions of girls study mathematics because someone along the way whispered her story, told them about the woman who wore philosopher's robes in a world that demanded silence, who solved equations while others solved heretics, who chose knowledge over safety. Every female mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, they're all walking in her footsteps. The Catholic Church, now there's a plot twist worth noting. The same institution whose early patriarch ordered her death? In 1991, they quietly added her to their calendar of notable figures. Not as a saint, but as a, let's call it, acknowledgement. A subtle admission that maybe, just maybe, they backed the wrong horse in 415. That killing teachers isn't actually what Jesus had in mind. That intellectual freedom and faith don't have to be enemies. Scientists love her for obvious reasons. She's the perfect martyr for rational thought. But historians see something deeper, something scarier, because Hypatia's murder wasn't just about one brilliant woman. It was about the moment Western civilization chose ignorance over inquiry, when the light started going out across the ancient world, when asking questions became more dangerous than accepting answers, when the mob became the teacher, and the teacher became the heretic. That's why her story refuses to die. Every generation rediscovers her when they need her most. During the Enlightenment, she became a symbol of reason versus superstition. In the 1800s, she represented women's right to education. In the 1960s, she was the ultimate feminist icon. Today, she's the patron saint of anyone who's ever been told to stop asking uncomfortable questions, to stop thinking dangerous thoughts. The feminists claimed her first, and honestly, they had every right. Here's a woman who lived exactly as she chose. Never married, never had children, devoted herself completely to learning and teaching, wore whatever clothes suited her work, spoke her mind in public, challenged men's ideas, refused to be quiet, invisible, obedient. In 415 AD, that was revolutionary. In some places today, it still is. But here's where her story gets complicated. Modern Alexandria has tried to rebuild itself around her memory. Museums, statues, conferences, research grants, all wonderful things, all necessary things. But sometimes I wonder if we're missing the point, if we're so busy celebrating her that we're not asking the harder question, the one that should keep us awake at night. Are we protecting the next Hypatia, or are we still sharpening the pottery? Look around the world today. How many brilliant minds are being silenced for asking the wrong questions? How many teachers are afraid to teach? How many students are afraid to learn? How many women are told their thoughts don't matter? How many scientists are threatened for their research? How many philosophers are exiled for their ideas? The methods change. The pottery becomes keyboards, harassment campaigns, death threats. But the mob is eternal. That's Hypatia's real challenge to us. Her legacy isn't just about remembering her brilliance, it's about recognizing the warning signs. When religious extremism starts targeting intellectuals, when political power feels threatened by academic freedom, when teaching becomes dangerous, when asking questions gets you killed. She's not just ancient history, she's tomorrow's headlines if we're not careful. If we don't learn from Alexandria's mistake, the flame she carried, it's not some metaphor, it's real. It's the human drive to understand, to question, to learn, to teach others what we've discovered, to push against the boundaries of knowledge, even when people tell us to stop, especially when they tell us to stop. That flame has passed from teacher to student for thousands of years, through persecution, through dark ages, through book burnings and witch trials and mob attacks. So here's the question Hypatia leaves us with, the one echoing through every classroom, every laboratory, every library named in her honour. Will we guard the flame? Will we protect the teachers? Will we defend the dangerous questions and the uncomfortable truths? Will we stand up to our own mobs when they come for our own philosophers? Because they will come. They always do. And when they do, whose side will we choose? Hypatia's watching. History's watching. Choose wisely.